Welcome to Pop Chat. My name is Annette Tarpley. I'm your host and the founder of The Passion of Poetry, and very happy to have with me today as a guest Bill Cushing. Welcome, Bill.
Thanks so much. I'm glad we met.
I know we have to. I'll have to start thanking. I'll have to start thanking Dr. Ingram every time for these, people that he's hooked me up with. But it's a pleasure to have you. I heard wonderful things about your work and can't wait till you unleash it for us.
Oh, thanks.
The first thing I'd like you to do, Bill, is I'm going to give you the stage, and instead of me like reading a bio, I want you to tell us about you, whatever you want to divulge about yourself, and
Hmm.
maybe some about your writing.
Well, actually, now it's funny because I came to poetry very late in life. I mean, well, I was 38 before I even returned back to school and started college, and that's when I got into poetry because of actually I was on the student newspaper and I went to a convention, a conference, and they had a workshop on how to improve your writing. And the woman who gave the workshop basically said, "Hey, you want to make your writing better in any field? Try writing poetry because such a disciplined form that it teaches you how to extract as much meaning out of every word you use as you can, and it's just a great discipline." I was like, "That's a really cool idea." And actually, the day after, when we were getting ready to leave the conference, was when I got my first idea for a poem. It was at one of these all night diners I went to, and I was like, "Oh, this is the perfect setting," because, of course, I'm a big Tom Waits fan, and that's all I could think of. And I'm from New York, so diners are a big part of my blood. But basically, yeah, I started out, I got out of high school, I went into the Navy, and then when I got out of the Navy, I just stayed with the work. Became an electrician's mate and kept working in that field until just a series of events brought me back to school, and that's how I started writing. And now I just retired in 2020 after 23 years of teaching community college, and so now I devote most of my time to the writing.
Great. What did you teach in community college?
It was English
Oh,
classes,
great.
usually freshman comp, uh, critical thinking, and then some basic classes.
Very good. We have some comments, and I want to just quickly a couple. We have hello kids, and sorry for the typo. I don't know if the kids part is the typo. I'm okay with being a kid. I'm good with that. So, um, so
I've been accused of a lot of things lately, but being a kid hasn't been one of them.
I want to remind the viewers and the people who are commenting, we love for you to comment, but please sign the end of your comment because otherwise you just show up as a Facebook user unless you've set your settings to reveal who you are. So please sign your comments so we know who you are. But so I gave you a little assignment and we were talking about that earlier before the show. So I'm really curious to see what you came up with. I'm curious with the title. So you came up with the title for us to write on.
Yeah, and that
And
was,
yeah,
yeah, side effects may include, uh, was the default title. And yeah, and so I'll just read what I came up with. So, so far, I mean, it's going to get some more work, but here's the poem itself. Our lives have become less than an asterisk. In uncertain times, what comes next? Now our dangers are the fires in the brain burning out who we are. Rather than run the risk of unhappiness, let's get products that work like magic, but do not take if allergic. 2 tablets daily will make you alert, let you lose weight at the hips, achieve smooth skin, full lips, with a slight risk of depression. Side effects vary. Contact your physician in case of hair thinning, vomiting, discoloration of eyes or urine. One application by hypodermic reduces urges to urinate, dissolves kidney stones, although it may cause brittle bones or a bit of rash. Warning, this product may cause dizziness, diarrhea, genital warts, or loosened jaw. and there is the occasional dose of road rage, perhaps infection at the site of injection. Clear clogged drains, toilets, and arteries with the finest Egyptian cotton sheets. Call now for a second free. Just pay handling fees.
That was great. I love that. I love that. I was trying to figure out where you came up with that title. I thought, whoa, that's a different. You just pulled that one out, and I was thinking, oh, what am I going to do with that?
Well,
So,
believe me, I just pulled it out too. So
so I came up with mine at the last minute here. I started this morning, and I got tired, and I took a nap. So, in my delirium out of my nap state, I wrote it. I finished it up, but it's side effects may include. I come before you, my friends, to warn you and enlighten you about a serious pandemic. Only an elite few are privy to its existence. Yet it has swept the world with a contagion that far surpasses the intellectual capacity and reasoning of the average man. Lean closer whilst I whisper the name of the highly contagious disease. Poetic plague. Its side effects may include ruminating thoughts that haunt the mind until unleashed onto paper, which may in turn cause sleepless nights and tormented insomnia. A fever may build up if suppressed and not unleashed, causing relentless perspiration. If the urge to write is not heeded, it may in turn lead to gnawing stomach cramps and nausea. The uncontrolled urge to write may cause writer's cramp, uncomfortable yet certainly not fatal. Anxiety, a racing heart, and panic attacks are often reported in those who attempt to ward off their desire to write. The only treatment and cure is to surrender to the tempting desires, writing at will when the pangs attack. 'Tis the only thing that will satisfy the continual urges and provide comfort for the afflicted. There you go.
you know, what it reminded me of was I don't know if you've seen that. It's a Facebook meme where the warning child's your child is being preyed on by poets or something like that. So they start talking in iambic pentameter, the warning signs that you're
Yeah, that's funny. That's funny. But yeah, I didn't know where to take that, so that's kind of where I went.
I kind of channeled one of my favorites is Tom Waits, and I don't know if you've ever heard his song "Step Right Up," which I've always loved, and of course he does it far better than I. But that was kind of my tribute to Tom Waits, which was work I just love.
Are you a musician too?
Oh no. I always say, give me a bucket, I'll carry a tune.
Yeah.
I do work with one, and in fact, we're going to be doing. He's in New York right now, but he'll be coming back here at the end of April. We're going to be doing a few shows around the area.
Nice.
Yeah, he and I actually grew up across the street from each other when we were kids. Fell completely out of touch for like 45 years, and then reconnected here in LA.
Wow.
He suggested, hey, let's team up and do something together. And so he plays, I read, and it's a lot of fun.
Oh, that's really cool. Do you ever video those events?
Actually, we do, and we have a YouTube. Well, we have a Facebook page. We go by the name Notes and Letters. Obviously, Chuck's the notes, I'm the letters, and we do have a YouTube channel as well. Which, if people just put my name in and Notes and Letters, it should take them right there.
Yeah, make sure you share that later.
I will. In fact, I'll do that. I'll find that and put it in the chat.
Yeah. We have. I guess it's. I think you've been watching too many drug commercials. Courtney.
Yeah, Courtney. Yeah. And that was actually the inspiration. Was that I was flailing around when you gave me the challenge of, all right, come up with a title. What kind of title? And I just happened to be up late, which I usually am, and watching, television, and the ads come on, and they're so ubiquitous now. I mean, it's just like you can't escape these drug commercials. And I always laugh at it. I'm like, yeah, well, my skin will be smooth, but I may die. But hey, smooth skin. So
Yeah, I can never figure out why they advertise the medications because they have to put all the horrendous side effects
yeah,
on there. And who wants to take it after they go through that list of horrible side effects? Including death may occur.
I know. Yeah, it always puzzles me as to why anybody would subject themselves. I mean, if it's the lesser of two evils, okay, fine. But
Right, right.
in most cases, I don't mind getting old and fat and tired.
So you've been writing for how long again?
Well, I would say 87, 88 would be when I started writing creatively. I mean, I always wrote. I kept journals and things like that, which, of course, drives my wife now nuts because I have piles of papers from the 70s and all that. I'm convinced that they'll turn into something.
Yeah, someday they could turn
But,
into something. Journaling. You could do your biography.
yeah. Well, actually, that's funny. I did write a memoir, which I finished last year or the beginning of this year. I'm sorry, but it's so long. It's just far too long. And so right now I'm playing with the idea of cutting way back on it and turning it into a novel. And that way I can cut, because I really went into every detail of my life, starting from the time I enlisted in the Navy till the time I returned to school, which is a 15, 16-year period.
Yeah.
It was too much. Most memoirs are 70 to 80,000 words. I have 155,000 words on this thing. It's like, there's no.
Wow.
So I think what I'm going to do is just cut out a lot of stuff, get to the basic, the Navy shipyard work, use that, maybe some of the other things, and novelize it. And actually, I'm playing with the idea of there's an old, I believe it's out of Norway or one of the Northern European. There's a Par Gunt is the name of the legend, and it's a very interesting piece of folklore. And I'm thinking of modeling it after that character because I sort of identify with him. He tends to screw things up, not that he means to, but just, ends up getting in trouble all the time.
Goodness. Well, so is there racy things in your novel? Will there be racy things in your novel?
Well, yeah, not overly. I think, I mean, I'm trying to, I really want to keep the opening line is one of my favorites. And this isn't exactly right, but it's basically, it's interesting to note that every bad habit I ever developed can be traced back to my time in the Navy.
I'm sure.
But I was fairly virginal until that moment. Just like.
So there we have. Do you know Courtney Nold?
Yes, yeah. Courtney is another veteran. Too many drug commercials. There you go. But yeah, she actually published.
Hi, Elizabeth. This is Elizabeth. She's a young poet from Nigeria. She's remarkable. Yes. So, well, very good. I am anxious to hear some more of your work. So I'm going to hand the stage over to you.
Okay.
And why don't you do a couple pieces for us?
Sure. And what I'd like to do is actually, and since I mentioned that this latest poem, which you put me to, it was kind of a tribute to Tom Waits. Really, the first poem I ever wrote, seriously. And like I say, it was about this diner I visited. And so here again, I'm trying to channel Tom Waits in this. So if you know his music, think of his music in the background, and it'll kind of give you an idea of where my head was. And like I say, this is really the first serious poem I wrote. And it's called In Pink Neon. Chrome and black tile at breakfast again. Coffee so strong it pulls your eyelids back going down. And while last evening's drunks with 5 a.m. shadows use it to try to face the new day, women, legs on spiked heels, lift leather skirts to reveal specialties of the house, initiating a physical negotiation, trading the tangible for currency. Enclosed cuffed hand, scaling triangle of whole wheat drips from sunny side up. A single waitress covers ground. Butter warmed by sun shining through slatted glass slowly rolls down a stack of brown pancakes. Silverware clatters, china against china, napkin falls, voices chatter, while outside in pink neon a sign glows. Best food in town, and it is. And that's that one. That actually came in my first book. That A Former Life was the first book that I had published, and was pleased I was able to get that out. I'll hit a few more. This is one has served me very well. Actually, my wife is Peruvian, and so naturally, I've had to go to Machu Picchu, and to get to Machu Picchu, you go to Cusco, and it's a fascinating area. I just fell in love with a lot of the stuff I saw there, and the indigenous tribes are called the Cusqueños, and that's what this is. This is the poem called Cusqueños. By the way, and just to let you know, when I get to the end, that last bit you hear is actually the Quechua language. Up where the mountains curl like sleeping dragons, peaks piercing far above the clouds, in another world, 2 miles above sea level, sits the center of the Incan Empire, Cusco, a Papute, belly button of the world. Like a crouching panther, this place, all diagonal slopes, everything hard stone, boulders, smooth squares of gray granite the size of a room, cobblestones, loose ovals of softer pastels, and of course, interrupting the landscape is the weighted masonry of churches with arches lifting statues, promising spirituality, but instead delivering conquest. In the morning comes the hammering from the town square. A stonemason crouches amid rocks, boulders, and stones. His song rings out with each ping of the steel, striking the rock he works on. Not far, the finisher chips discreetly on the rough work, trimming the rock into shapes that could easily have come from a lathe. Then there are the people, Cusqueños, trudging along the sloping roads and paths. They carry belongings or wares in the licla, colorful blankets sprouting babies, flowers, hay, or more stones. The wraps that wrap around stooping shoulders and seem to push the carriers into their own incline as they make their shuffling way up these narrow and steep streets, while we tourists steep cocoa in our rooms, attempting to adjust to the heights. At midnight, we bolt awake, our bodies gulping air to catch breath. Feeling a tingling in fingers, we drown in thin air. The Cusqueños, like the stones surrounding them, are squat, brown, with hearts enlarged and noses slightly widened, equipment for the altitude. The old ones peer through occidental eyes, cracked and peeling from age and knowledge ancient and pure. The look says, "Nu conscious augmenta casanchus." We will endure. And that's that.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, is there anyone else in your family who writes other than you?
I have a niece who does artwork, but she's also a phenomenal singer. In fact, she's basically that's what she majored in, was musical theater. Not my immediate family, no. I'm the only one kind of dumb enough to do this thing.
Well, that's not true.
But,
it's not a dumb thing. Does
but
your
no, my father was an engineer. My mother was a nurse. My sister's a nurse. Although my sister now, I love bragging about this. She is now working as a ventriloquist part-time. She's actually getting some pretty good gigs.
Wow, that's fun.
Yeah.
Wow.
But she was a nurse for like 22 years.
Wow. And now she's ventriloquist.
Yep.
Love that. Love that.
Yeah.
So, is there, how do you find support? Does your family
You know,
support it?
it's fun. I do. It's interesting because my dad was always very practical. I say he's an engineer, um, and I never really thought that he cared for what I did. Uh, but then after he died, I remember at the memorial, all of his friends coming up to me and saying, your father has been passing your stuff around for years. So while he never openly said anything to me, obviously he enjoyed what I was doing. I was proud of what I did because he was passing along to all these guys he grew up with and knew. And they said, "Oh, yeah, I've been reading your stuff for years."
Wow, that was nice though
So
of
he
him.
would never cop to it, but, apparently
Yeah, that's amazing though that he really felt that way.
yeah.
Is your wife supportive? If you write
Oh, yeah.
something,
Yeah. I mean,
have you listen to this?
she puts up with a lot there. There's no doubt. Because I'm always going off to readings or, doing workshops, whatever. Uh, yeah, I mean, and I think I mean, she always likes, hey, look, I have a friend's birthday coming up. Do you have a book I can pass along to her that she might like? Okay, fine.
Nice. That's nice. And do you want to explain your shirt that you have on this evening?
Yes, this is thanks to Michael Ingram, who runs the quintessential listening. What is it? Quintessential poetry online or quintessential listening, which I should be ashamed not knowing it because he's had me on a few times and we're scheduled to go on again here pretty soon.
Yeah.
Because Chuck and I are going to join him for an interview, kind of previewing our set of gigs coming up. Uh,
Nice. Nice.
yeah,
Cool.
Michael gave this to me as a kind of a door prize for one of his readings. Because I don't know, he figured, well, I don't need to send him a book or anything like that. He's probably got plenty. So here's a T-shirt.
He's a great writer himself.
Yeah, he's a
So,
great
yeah.
facilitator. I'm sorry if he's listening in, I'm sorry we didn't get to meet several years ago when we planned, but that's still on the table. Uh,
Okay. So you almost met in person. Is that what you're
yeah,
saying?
it's funny because I retired in February of 2020, right before the pandemic, the lockdown all took place. But the idea for my retirement was I was going to do, I told my wife, I said, look, every time I go to my high school reunions, it's just for the weekend. We fly out, we fly back. I said, let's do something touristy and take like 2.5 weeks and we'll go out. And, I had all these plans. And one of the things was to stop in DC because my sister's still in Virginia and she could meet us there. And I told Mike, I said, hey, I'm going to be in your neck of the woods. Let's get together for some lunch at least. But of course, that got blown out of the water with the lockdown. So,
Yeah. Stuff happens always,
yeah,
doesn't it? Yeah. One of the things I'm going to ask you is something I ask everyone who comes on here. And that is you run across Aladdin's lamp tomorrow. You are granted 3 wishes. You can wish for anything you want to wish for.
geez.
What would you wish for?
Oh, that's a tough one. Because I always say, watch out for genies. They always give you a backhand. I don't know. Geez. I would say, well, one thing would obviously be a nice big place for us and our son. Of course, a 40-foot sailboat wouldn't hurt any. Uh, and then I guess enough money in the bank so that we can go around sailing and
There you go. There you go.
just draw it out when we need it. Yeah, it's funny because I don't know. It's one of those things because you always get the question if you could go back and change your life, would you? I don't know because even the screw ups I did sort of led me to where I am now. So
Yeah, that's true. I think that, yeah, those things that we go through just make us who we are, regardless. We all go through stuff. So
yeah.
eventually you get there. And do you do very many live events? Like, do they have a lot of open mics and stuff?
It's kind of restrict. I do go as much as I can. It's not as much as I'd like, but here again, I mentioned, we have a very disabled son. He needs a lot of attention, and we can't just use any babysitter. You have to have somebody who's medically trained, who knows his case. Uh, and so, yeah, we're pretty limited on what we can do going out. In fact, my wife and I were big movie buffs. We used to go to the movies all the time. Of course, that diet has been pretty restricted now, but we still get away and do. We'll go to the opera. Go to shows, that sort of thing.
Right,
Um,
right.
I even like when I go sailing, I try and make it on a weekday when he's at his community program and I can break away for a few hours and go out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was at one last night, which actually kind of a cool note is if anybody looks at our YouTube channel, the video work was done by one of my former students who now owns the coffee shop where I went and did the reading last night. So,
Oh, wow. That's interesting. That's
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Wow. That's really neat. Well, I'm going to have you share a couple more pieces.
Okay, sure.
Let me give you the stage again.
Well, let's see. Should I go with what have I got? Well, let me do this. One of my favorites, that the book Music Speaks, and like I say, I love music. Not Can't perform it myself, but I've been very proud of this book. And I'll read a short one and then a longer one, which kind of also shows you where my head is at musically. The first one is, if anybody knows Eubie Blake, this is called Blake's Song. Eubie did it better than anyone, not just music, but life as well. Sneaking off at 13, already a pro, playing at a Baltimore brothel. He filled time for men lounging on couches, pulling slugs of whiskey from flasks, waiting for the girl of, if not their dreams, at least their choice that evening. Then people hummed his show tunes, but his true calling being the Rachmaninoff of ragtime. Long fingers doing what few can hope to, created perfect stops, gaps, leading to rolling trills, rollicking dances on black keys, running along accidentals of sharps and flats. Later, I watched him play on a Manhattan stage as Alberta Hunter sang, both seeming unaware of the crowd gathered about them, he having a year for each key of his instrument, she 80, nearly 2 centuries of experience. I wasn't at a music hall that night. Instead, I stood on the edge of Mount Olympus, looking up, getting a chance to eavesdrop on gods of music as they played. And this one is this is a very early one of mine. And I was particularly proud of this because I wrote it. Miles Davis has always been one of my favorites. And when he died, I locked myself in my bedroom with all my Miles Davis recordings and a bottle of whiskey and just started listening to music and writing notes and drinking. And this is pretty much what came out. And it was funny because, and I write it in here, that 2 weeks later, I was at a jazz festival doing interviews. I was able to interview Chick Corea, who, of course, played with Miles back in the 60s. And I mentioned to him, I said, yeah, I did write a poem about Miles Davis. And I really got high off this. Chick Corea said, that's probably the best way to commemorate Miles is with a poem. So here's my attempt at a poem from Miles Davis. And the title is actually one of his quotes. Music isn't about standing still and being safe. Listen, 2 weeks after you died, 250,000 thronged by the St. John's River to hear the music you had spawned, hoping to see you, but even in death you never looked back. They were all there, Hannibal, Bird, Chick, Jojo, Red, Jocko, Bean, Dizzy, my favorite, Freddie Freeloader. Isolated, you were a beacon, a flagship for messages of the heart, back to the crowd, unbowed, that proud dance walk, announced by muted horn that spoke and broke through all the bull and told us about a place miles ahead of everyone else. You spent a lifetime thinking for yourself, speaking to every generation, playing it all. Jazz, blues, funk, rock, fusion. Categories took a back seat to creativity and rhythm, space and feeling, spirit. I remember fourth grade, picking up a horn, then laying it down. Rock and roll was my world. What did I know? 7 years later, I heard. It was in the garden where you brought me back to music. I walked all the way home, miles from that train station, my head pounding with sounds, frantic fast as the subway I spent the night on. Those African rhythms you used decades before anyone else even thought to, filling my head, letting me know I'd have it all down cold if I could walk as cool as the notes you heard coming from miles. You had that thing, that style, that spark that was a blue flame jumping off a gas stove, igniting everything, everywhere, touching the genetic resonant frequency in all. So
Excellent.
my
Very
tribute to
good.
Miles.
Yeah, love that. Is there any other poets that you feel strongly about?
Geez, I've always liked Heather McHugh. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her. She's out of Ohio, actually. Philip Levine, I really admire his stuff. Now, I don't write like him, but I've just always enjoyed his writing and reading his writings. Donald Justice, I think, is another one. In fact, that one book cover you showed, Just a Little Cage of Bone, is actually a line stolen from one of Donald Justice's poems, because I loved it so much when he said that.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I got to use that somewhere. And I do use it in one of the poems too. Gwendolyn Brooks, I absolutely love her stuff. In fact, I love to brag. When I was an undergraduate, I took a course in modern American women poets, and we had to do a paper on one of the poets that we weren't studying within the class. So I picked Gwendolyn Brooks, and when I turned the paper in, my primary source was Gwendolyn Brooks.
She's an African American writer.
Yeah, she's out of Chicago. But it was so funny because the professor gives me my professor was Judith Hemschmeyer, if anybody's familiar with her work, another wonderful poet out of Wisconsin. But when she gave me the paperback, she was like, "How did you do this?" And I said, "Well, I went to the library, I got the Chicago phone book, and she's listed, so I called her."
That's funny. Do you have a signature poem, one that you consider your?
Well, I guess, yeah, actually, there is one that went into an anthology of poets that they said this is the poem you most identify with. And here again, it also involves stealing a line from a good writer.
Yeah, go ahead and read it for us.
Yeah, it's called "Sailing" for Joseph Conrad. And when I read Heart of Darkness, there was one line in there that I just loved, and I said, I got to use this somewhere. And so I found it in here. And I have been sailing since I was 5 years old, and I continue to do so now. So this is my poem, "Sailing." I have always taken the 4 a.m. watch, those 3 hours before dawn when, inhaling the moist sweetness of a new day, we awake and escape last night's darkness, leaving technology to experience quiet and primitive satisfaction. The ocean rushing underneath, its volume dependent upon current hull speed, spills a phosphorescent wake, the only natural source of light besides the moon. Rolling up and down, swaying into balance on the balls of my feet while cradling the warmth of a mug's contents. Soon an orange sliver appears and grows as the sun finds the seam in the weld that fixes sea to sky.
That's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Thanks a lot.
How long does it usually take you to write a piece?
That's funny. one of the members of my writing group, and we're more involved in prose. So she asked me, it's probably 8 hours, not all in one sitting, of course. I'll
Wow.
rough it out for a little bit, come
Wow.
back to it. To me, it's all revision. That's, 80% or 85% of writing to me is revising. Uh, and
Wow.
so, yeah, it's probably like the Miles Davis poem is interesting because that's one of the few that I like to call them the found poem, is where it comes out pretty much. I mean, not to say it didn't go through some changes, but what you heard was pretty much what I came up with on the first draft. But
Yeah.
normally, yeah, these things go through tons of drafts before I'm always working on 4 or 5 at one time, and just, all right, I hit a dent in here. I've gone as far as I can with it for today. Let me put it away and come back to it.
I just kind of spit it out.
Yeah,
I might go over it a couple of times. I'm done.
I can't do
Um,
that, and I
yeah.
think, to me, what it means is I'm more of a craftsman than a writer, more than anything else. I'm
Yeah.
pretty good at editing, and that's my strength. And yeah, when I was in Jacksonville, I was I don't know if you ever heard of Christian Golson or Andres Rojas, two very good poets that I happened to meet while living in Jacksonville. And Andres is still in Florida. I think Christian's now in New Mexico. Um, but I would listen to their stuff. I said, God, I wish I could write like you guys. But yeah, they're both very good writers that I just really enjoy, and I still keep up with them and their work. Um, but
Do you think that you have a set style, or do you think you change it up?
Geez, that's a good one. Lately, I have been going into formats of traditional forms, uh, Japanese forms, Spanish forms, that sort of thing. And that started probably about 3 or 4 years ago. I started doing that because I said, look, I'm pretty comfortable with doing the free verse, blank verse stuff. Let me try and pull back into some more disciplined work. Now, it's funny because I'm with a poetry group that we meet every Saturday. And one of the things I get from them is I'll come in with something. I say, okay, this is in a madrigal form or the decima form or whatever. And one of the guys will go, all right, it's okay, but why don't you just break out of that form now and take the thing somewhere else, which I'll do sometimes. I go, okay. Yeah, these guys come up with some great ideas to work with. But yeah, I've been doing that a lot. I'm now writing in fact, it's an ode to, I don't know if you ever have you heard of this group, Otikin, out of Siberia. It's an indigenous group, and they play the traditional music, tribal music, but they give it a very modern bent. And it's really cool stuff. And I just love it. So I'm writing something about them. I'm actually getting ready to write probably a Chardoma. My nephew just had his third child, and she was born on my birthday. So I thought, well, maybe it'd be cool for their first birthday or for her first birthday, write something. So it gives me a year to write it. I could take
When's your birthday? When's your
was
birthday?
actually the 7th. So
Happy
a little over
birthday.
a week. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Thanks.
My brother's is at 8th.
Oh, really? That's great. My wife is the 9th. So,
My ex-husband's is the 10th, but we don't do that anymore.
well,
So
10th is, who else is the 10th? Is it Einstein or Bach? I know one's the 10th, one's the 14th. But I
wow.
can't remember which one's which.
Einstein and Bach were born in March also. That's
Yeah.
interesting. I was
And
just listening. I was listening to Bach this morning.
oh, really?
I
Okay.
was sitting outside and the deer came by.
Oh,
And I love playing classical music for the deer.
oh,
So,
okay.
so I
Yeah.
played Bach's G air on a G
Oh,
string.
Aaron. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I played that and they just listened. And then later on I played them. I like Jane Monheit. You know Jane Monheit?
Okay. Yeah, I'm familiar with the name.
Maz. Yeah, she does an Overjoyed that is a Stevie
Oh,
Wonder song, but she takes it and she slows down the tempo and she totally kind of sexifies it. I mean, it's
oh,
just
yeah.
yeah, it's a beautiful rendition. So I'm playing them. But anyway, so they're grazing in my yard. They were probably there for about 45 minutes.
Yeah.
One of them lays down in my yard.
Oh,
And just was looking at me the whole time, laying
that's
there, looking at me.
yeah,
It was,
that's funny. That
yeah.
reminds me of when our son was first born. Um, I was taking care of him one day, and you know, I had just gotten this new book of poetry, and I was reading it to him, and he was crying and just restless and all kinds of stuff. And it was funny because I'm reading it, and while he's getting upset, I finally thought, yeah, you're right. The stuff's not very good. I'm not really enjoying it. I pulled out a book of Whitman. I pulled out my book of Whitman poems and started reading that to him. And he chilled right out. So I was like, no, I have to think also probably some of it was me because my own reading voice, because I love Whitman so much. I just really get into it.
Oh, that's true.
So that might have been part of it. Was he was coming off of my own tenor.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, exactly. Greg Etzel's here. Hey, Greg. He's a frequent viewer of the program. You know Greg? And he was, you are a poet, says Greg. Greg, I believe, lives in Florida somewhere. I'm not sure.
Really?
Not sure where in Florida.
Okay. Well, I was in Jacksonville for 10 years and then Orlando for 3. So.
Wow. My aunt lives in Jacksonville. She used to live in St. Augustine.
Oh, I love St. Augustine. Jeez.
Yeah, it's a great place.
Although, one of my favorite places there, and at the reading I was at yesterday or last night, met a woman who had lived there too, was Savannah, Georgia.
I've heard so much about Savannah, how great it is.
And it's only 2 hours away from Jack, so I could drive right up there and spend a weekend if I wanted. Yeah, wonderful little town, which is funny because it started as a penal colony. In fact, the whole state was basically where the king dumped off his prisoners.
Wow, I did not know that about Savannah. No, you educated me. Thank you. So,
which is why there are so many good Irish pubs in Savannah.
I'm sure there are. Which should be very busy coming up pretty soon. We've got St. Patrick's Day coming up.
Yeah.
So
I always say if you can't make it to New York for St. Patty's, go to Savannah. It's
second best.
It's close enough. Yeah.
Go ahead and share a couple more works with us.
Okay. I was just thinking, let me see. Well, let me go off this one. One of the book, This Just In, which is a little more expensive, but it's a lot slicker and has illustrations. So I was like, okay, I was very happy with that one. But this is one, I always like to say this is my Christmas poem because it came about during that season. This is called Hazardous Material. The package is placed on government-approved scales when comes the inevitable question. Are any hazardous or inflammatory items contained herein? I hesitate to answer because, after all, hidden behind envelope paper are books. Is Bukowski as dangerous as Bakunin? Perhaps reading Ovid may pave the way to weddings for gays. If I send Vonnegut or Solzhenitsyn, am I guilty of shipping sedition? Might young ladies taking in too much richer Plath be enticed down a primrose path? Transmitting thoughts across state lines could indeed prove dangerous, especially given that ideas usually prove to be the true enemies of the state. So that's that one. I'll read something from my last book, is that Just a Little Cage of Bone. And this is one, well, another one of those what might be called a found poem. It came out of the conversation I was having with Chuck one day about the old neighborhood. And I was telling him about, hey, my first job was across the street. So this is a poem called First Work. At 10, I sought my first paycheck from Mr. Kunstler, the old man across the street, wheezing on a porch step, laid low by emphysema. I'd hear his body struggle, trying to sing songs he'd sung when young, now chained to heavy tanks to inflate his lungs. Each Saturday, he'd sit behind a roll-top desk, retrieve his ledger to sign the check I earned dragging their 2 metal trash cans to the curb 3 times a week. When needed, I cut the grass, shoveled snow from the walk. His signature's scrawled and jagged, the only flourish he had left in him. But a half-century before, he'd been a warrior, a Basque who'd fought Franco, an armed fury riding horseback through the forests or across mountains that spanned the Spanish border. On days he wasn't hindered by breathlessness, he'd recall those years, invading the plains, then sleeping on stone beds or hiding, huddled around clandestine fires set after scaling those coastal steppes. Once he croaked the words, Askatasuna et Heralda, freedom and country. And in that moment, his face brightened, his back straightened, and he seemed to shed age. Often, my job's done, his wife of 60 years sat with me at their kitchen table. She poured homemade lemonade, fed me slices of burnt cheesecake. From our country, she'd say, her aged eyes fixed on her own distant memory. After he died, she tripled my pay to thank me for returning her husband a measure of pride. So,
Beautiful poetry. I love it.
Thanks a lot.
You do have a lot of imagery. I'm sitting there as you're describing everything, imagining it all. So very good. Do you speak in metaphors often?
I love metaphor. In fact, when I'm teaching, I'm sure I drive my students nuts. I spend at least an hour or so on metaphor alone, just going into what it is. In fact, when I was doing my graduate work, I studied Lakoff quite a bit. And also it was a Susan Sontag wrote I think it was Metaphors We Live By was her book. I think metaphor, it's the most natural human imagery we've got. I mean, it's so simple. And here again gets back to that notion of poetry is compacting language to unpack later. I think the metaphor offers the most direct image that can lead to so many more things.
Yeah. Well, you said something about it being simple, but I think some people have difficulty with metaphors.
They have a difficulty with it. I think they get scared off by the name. And that's sort of what I say. Look, it's just a fancy word for something you're doing every day of your life.
Wow.
And the example I always tell them, I say, all right, how many people here make their bed? When you make the bed, do you put the pillow at the head of the bed? They go, oh, yeah. Well, the bed doesn't have a head. Bed doesn't care where your head goes.
That is true.
Stake out that territory, and that's the head of the bed.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. So I do the whole thing. Like I say, I spend at least an hour, probably an hour and a half, just on that one notion. That's because, well, also because I use, and Orwell in his Politics in English Language talks about metaphor quite a bit.
So, you used to teach for a few years. Do you know if any of your students are published writers?
It's funny. The one I do know of, well, actually, there's two I know, but the one that I was really pleased with, when I was living in Puerto Rico, I taught high school, and I did a writing workshop class for one of the schools I worked at. And there was a girl there. She was a senior. She wrote this poem. And I told her, I said, look, it needs a little work. I'm not saying it's perfect or anything or done, but this could be published. I said, I suggest you work on it and send it out. And I guess it was her sophomore year in college when she went to school. And I got an email from her saying, hey, it got published. I was like,
oh, that's great.
But and there was another young woman who was in my college class a few years ago who it was funny because I used to lower her grade more than she probably, maybe more than she even deserved. But I said, your language is very good, but this is not the assignment. You got to stay focused. This is a freshman comp class. You got to do this stuff. So it's funny because I always told her, I said, your grade should be much better than it is because you have a real command of the language.
She just didn't use it properly.
Yeah,
huh?
you go off on these tangents, which all of us do.
Yeah.
And I kept trying to rein her in, somewhat unsuccessfully, but why not? I mean, she went her own way and has done quite well.
So is there anything that you think that we can do to somehow promote poetry? Do you feel like poetry is kind of taken backstage in the literary world?
I think, well, I was like, Philip Levine once said that I went to one of his conferences, and while he was there, he said, what is it? Writing poetry in the United States and expecting to make a difference is like peeing in the Pacific and waiting for the tide to rise. So
Yeah,
you do it for yourself.
you do.
The thing what I loved, my first book, The Former Life, when that came out, I really pushed it, and some of my old high school friends bought the book just to help me out. And I think the best review I got was one of the guys said that, yeah, I don't feel like I need to be an academic to read your stuff, and that's something. And actually, I got that lesson from Christian, who I mentioned earlier, Christian Golson, said, look, I don't care if the PhD likes it because there's many, I want the cleaning lady to like it. There's more cleaning ladies than PhDs.
Yeah, I always preach the beauty of simplicity, that you
Yeah.
do not have to use complex word or verbiage in order to,
Oh, yeah. I'm
write.
a big believer in KISS.
Yeah. I think that when you can take simplistic words and manipulate them and choreograph them in such a way that incites emotions and moves people, it is much more of an art form than.
Yeah, and that's, I think, one of the things. Not that I don't go into mythology sometimes and things like that, but one of the fun ones I love was I wrote a poem about 9/11, and in there I used the image of Icarus. And this one publisher took the poem, but he wrote back to me and says, "Look, one of my editors is a little bit bothered by the Icarus reference there. Any way you're willing to change it?" I said, "Look." Everybody who writes, and especially anybody who's a poet, wants to do an Icarus. It's like every actor wants to do Hamlet's soliloquy. Every poet wants to do an Icarus image. I said, I don't see me ever getting away with it anywhere else but in this piece. So yeah, I do want to keep it in there. And he said, okay, I can go with that argument. But yeah, I think that's, well, when I was an undergraduate, they called me the blue collar poet. And a lot of it was, I had spent the last 15 years doing blue collar work. I mean, I've been building ships and working on oil tankers and stuff like that. And that's a lot of my experience, is going to bars and, going to diners and hanging out with people that, may be less than desirable in polite company. But
Right.
it's good material.
Yeah. So tomorrow, you have found out it is your last day to write a poem. What are you going to entitle your poem?
It would probably be the one I'm working on for my great, or not my great, I'm not saying great, I'm not that old, my grandniece, I guess she would be, my nephew's new baby. Because I would like to leave something behind for a family member if possible. And I've written extensively. Of course, family comes into my poetry a lot. It's just, even my father shows up. The poems, one of the poems I wrote about my mother, my father's the dominant figure there, which
really
probably replicates the relationship too, to a degree. But
yeah, was he the dominating factor, I guess?
Yeah,
of course. Yeah.
But,
why don't you share one more with us before?
Sure. Well, let me. What sounds good? Let me see what I've got here marked. If I have, well, speaking of, I just talked about my father. Let me talk about my mother a little bit. This is one. It's one of the last images I have of my mother, and it involves my sister as well. It's called Mirrored Images for JoJo and Mom. Two women sit, threading fingers, intertwining generations. Hands weave like vines of ivy, crawling along an ancient tree. The mother, withered and firm, droops in the chair as she stares at the other, her eyes vacant, coated by the film of age. The daughter, vibrant, lively, rests soft palms over gnarled skin that sags above bony fingers, knuckles stiffened by arthritis. So the parent, now docile, becomes nurtured by the child.
That was a lovely poem.
Thank you much. Yeah.
And a lovely note to end upon. So that's great. Excuse me, I got a tickle in my throat.
Let me, how do I get into, let's see, how do I leave a comment? Can I do that?
I don't know if we can comment on their thing.
I see other people commenting.
Yeah, on the bottom.
If I do private chat, let me do that, and maybe you can share it if anybody's interested.
Your site.
This is the YouTube page that Chuck and I have created.
Okay, let me share that. Okay, I got it. So let me see if we can do that. I'll see if I can do that. Oh, yeah. Wait, I should press copy link. Okay. And then we go back to comments and see if I can leave it.
And of course, if anybody wants, I'm always willing to sell books. So
always, yes.
They can use my email, which.
And I pressed then copy ink, but
I see it. It came up.
But it didn't come up. It's not highlighted like a link for mine. Is it on yours?
I see. Yeah, they can. I guess they could copy it and paste it in directly. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out why. Let me see if I can try one more.
Send.
Oh.
I also just sent you my email if you want to share that as well. If anybody wants to get in touch. And like I say, you can arrange to send signed copies if they like.
Yes, indeed.
I've also got a couple of prose books. In fact, the one I just came out with, which I'm really proud of, involves two family members of mine who fought in the Civil War.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Now that came up a little weird as far as that Bill Cushing part.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
On the end of it is not right, but that was the previous one. But there is your
yeah, right after the PM,
which you put your Pisces on there. There you
Pisces go. Poet, yeah. And the fact that I don't have a number shows you how long I've been on Yahoo.
Well, I can't tell you what a pleasure it is to have you on and to listen to your beautiful poetry.
Thank you so much.
We thank, of course, Dr. Michael Anthony Ingram for connecting us.
Thank you. Shout out to him. And it's funny, I actually met him through Marianne Zlick, who's another poet out of Maryland.
Marianne who?
Zlick is how you pronounce her name.
Wow.
I always thought I was always mispronounced. A Polish name. Szlyk. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm zoning out on her actual spelling, but she was the one who turned me on to Michael, and I've managed to wean my way into his website a few times.
Well, I thank you so much.
Thanks so much for the invite. I was very
welcome. It's been a pleasure. And,
I'm usually the one begging. It's nice to be invited.
Of course, it was my pleasure. Love and blessings to everyone who's watched and who's commented. And this will go up on YouTube and Facebook as the recorded versions, and you can feel free to share it with all. So thank you so much. Thank you, Bill, again. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.